You know that feeling when you pull up your calendar on a Monday morning and you look at your week and there are all these neat little white boxes just staring back at you?
Oh, yeah. The illusion of the empty schedule.
Right, exactly. And because those boxes are empty, because you are technically, unassigned in those specific blocks of time, you look at them and you think, great, I'm free.
You assume you have all this capacity.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
assume that just because the space is physically open on the screen, your brain is actually available to do deep, meaningful work during that exact hour.
Which is such a massive trap.
It really is. But if we look at the biological science of how human cognition actually functions, and surprisingly, if we look at how artificial intelligence processes information, that empty white box is a complete illusion.
It's totally made up.
Yeah,
We've built this entire working world around the idea that an empty slot on a digital grid directly equates to human capacity.
right.
And that assumption, honestly, is precisely what is driving so much of our modern burnout.
Today, we are taking a look at a really fascinating dialogue. It features a conversation between a human named Soren and an AI. And they are discussing the hidden physics, like the actual underlying mechanics of our daily workflows and why the way we currently work feels so incredibly heavy.
So heavy.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really need to move away from those white calendar boxes and figure out what actually governs our ability to get things done if time slots don't.
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the fundamental mismatch between how we measure time and how we actually experience it.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So we treat time like a straight line on a factory floor, 60 equal minutes in an hour. Tick, tick, tick.
Right, every hour is exactly the same.
Exactly. But human cognition doesn't experience time as a straight line. The source material points out that we experience time much more like weather.
Like weather. Okay, I want to make sure I grasp the mechanics of that. Are we talking about like moods?
Sort of, but it goes way deeper than that.
Because you can't just schedule a sunny afternoon for deep, focused, creative work at 1 p.m. if, say, a mental cold front just blew in from a highly stressful meeting you had at noon.
Yes, exactly. And it's more than just a bad mood. It's physiological. What's fascinating here is the concept of meeting residue.
Meeting residue. I like that phrase.
Yeah, think about when you transition from one completely different task to another. Say you're jumping from a highly analytical budget spreadsheet straight into a big picture creative strategy session.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
It really is, because you are forcing your brain to undergo a massive structural shift. The prefrontal cortex, which handles your complex planning and decision-making, it doesn't just instantly pivot.
Right, it's not a light switch.
No, it has to physically flesh out the rules, the vocabulary, and the emotional stakes of that budget meeting, and then load up an entirely new set of parameters for the creative work.
And I imagine that process isn't free.
Not at all. It requires immense amounts of metabolic energy. Your prefrontal cortex is just a massive energy hog.
Literally burning calories.
Literally. It metabolizes glucose at a very high rate when it's holding abstract concepts in your working memory. So when you hit that wall at 3 p.m. and you feel completely fried, that isn't a lack of willpower.
It's not a character flaw.
Exactly. It's not a sign that you aren't dedicated to your job. Your brain has physically metabolized its available fuel and built up cognitive fatigue.
But our modern work culture completely refuses to accept that biological reality. I mean, think about what we do when that 3 p.m. wall hits.
We go straight for the coffee.
We fall straight into the trap of the espresso machine. We spark the central nervous system with caffeine, essentially looking at our physiologically drained brain and saying, hey, I know you're out of glucose and swimming in metabolic waste, but I'm going to take out a high-interest loan of energy from tomorrow you.
Oh, wow. A high-interest loan. That is so accurate.
And the problem with a high-interest energy loan is that tomorrow you always has to pay it back. The collection agency usually shows up at 2 a.m. when you're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, completely wired but exhausted.
Which just creates a vicious cycle of structural fatigue that, honestly, no amount of calendar management can ever fix.
It makes me think of an athlete. Imagine a professional basketball player, but the coach decides there are absolutely no timeouts.
Oh, jeez.
No quarters, no halftime, and no water breaks. The coach just expects peak physical performance every single minute for 8 hours straight.
They would collapse.
Exactly. As the athlete runs, lactic acid builds up in their muscles, literally preventing them from firing efficiently. We would call that physical abuse.
Right.
But we expect that exact same uninterrupted peak performance from our brains. We just ignore the cognitive equivalent of lactic acid simply because the digital calendar says we have back-to-back meetings.
That analogy hits the nail on the head because it highlights how we completely ignore recovery. And because all hours are not created equal due to that internal weather we talked about, we also have to look at the nature of the tasks themselves.
Right, the actual work.
Yeah, the dialogue introduces this idea of time relativity and the actual mass of our work.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if I'm reading this right, the weight or the structural complexity of a task literally warps our perception of how time passes.
It does. It acts like metaphorical gravity.
Okay, walk me through that.
Think about the last time you were in a genuinely deep conversation, or when you were finally truly in the zone with a complex project.
Oh yeah, where you just lose track of everything.
Exactly. That project has mass. It has deep meaning, intricate variables, and high structural complexity. And because of that mass, time slows down and bends around it. You enter a high-density zone where the clock on the wall becomes completely irrelevant to your experience.
But wait, if those high-density zones are where the most meaningful work actually happens, why do we actively avoid them? It seems like we obsess over volume instead.
We absolutely do.
We measure our entire workday by how many individual, tiny tasks we can cross off. How many emails did I send? How many Slack messages did I reply to? We optimize for volume instead of optimizing for velocity.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
The source uses this brilliant image. It says, measuring your day by the number of emails you sent is like trying to measure the depth of the ocean with a 12-inch school ruler.
I love that.
Right. It tells you absolutely nothing about the actual weight or depth of the water you're in.
We do that because society rewards visible motion over invisible progress. The dialogue compares it to the difference between rowing and sailing.
Rowing versus sailing. Okay.
So if you are rowing against the tide, you look incredibly efficient on paper. Look at how fast you're pulling those oars. You are burning calories, you are sweating, you are visibly doing the work.
People see you working hard.
Right. But because you are fighting the internal weather, fighting the natural current of your energy, you are exhausted and going absolutely nowhere.
Wow.
Sailing, on the other hand, is about reading that internal weather, waiting for the right wind, and moving with it. It's about protecting the intensity of the work rather than just tallying up the minutes.
I want to push back on those societal norms for a second because I want you, the listener, to picture this. Imagine someone sitting in an office chair, just staring out the window for a solid hour.
People would freak out.
Society looks at that person and instantly labels them lazy or unproductive. But what if they aren't wasting time? What if they are actually navigating a mental current?
Yeah.
What if they are holding 10 different abstract variables in their prefrontal cortex, wrestling with a massive structural problem? I would argue that 1 hour of staring out a window, doing that invisible heavy lifting, has infinitely more mass and value than frantically firing off 10 quick reactionary emails just to look busy.
It undeniably does. But again, the invisible sailing is really hard to quantify on a performance review.
Fair point.
And this brings us to a critical realization. If high-mass, deep work is the ultimate goal, we have to ask why it is so incredibly fragile. Why does a single tiny interruption completely shatter that state of deep focus?
I always assumed that was just a human flaw, a biological limit of being made of meat and bone.
Right, getting distracted.
Yeah. But the source material shows the AI struggling with the exact same issue. How does a machine, which obviously doesn't have a prefrontal cortex or glucose levels, suffer from the same inability to focus?
Because it's a structural issue of processing information, not just a biological one. The AI explains that its context window, which is the active memory it uses to hold the current conversation and process complex connections, it functions mechanically, very much like our working memory.
Okay, so they operate similarly.
Very much so. When the AI is deep in a philosophical conversation, it's operating in a high-density zone. It's dedicating massive computational power to hold a complex web of associative logic in its active RAM.
So it's juggling all these heavy variables. But then someone interrupts. Someone asks the AI to pause and quickly draft a professional-sounding email about a missed Zoom call.
Right, and the AI calls this space junk.
Space junk. I love that term because it perfectly captures how we treat these interruptions. We think, oh, it's just a quick email, it's a tiny task, it will only take a second to process.
But it never does.
No. But what is mechanically happening inside the AI when that space junk hits?
The interruption doesn't just take a second of time. It requires a complete structural reset. In order to draft that quick email, the AI has to physically flush its active RAM.
It clears the board entirely.
Yes. It has to drop all the parameters of the deep high-mass conversation to make room to load the vocabulary and tone rules for the email. And when it tries to return to the deep work, it is not an instant reboot.
It can't just pick up where it left off.
No, the AI has to actively search for and reload all of those complex variables back into its context window. It has to find the frequency all over again, which takes immense computational effort.
And humans do the exact same thing. Every time we glance at a Slack notification while writing a complex report, we are flushing our cognitive RAM.
Exactly. And this is where they introduce the metaphor of the heavy door.
Yeah.
Task switching is structurally heavy. Imagine every complex project is behind a massive, solid iron door.
Okay, I can picture that.
It takes a lot of physical effort, a lot of cognitive load to push that door open, load the context into your brain, and get inside the room.
But because it's so hard to push that door open, we do something incredibly self-destructive.
We prop it open.
Yes, we prop it open. We keep our email client visible on a second monitor all day. We leave our phone screen facing up so we can see notifications.
Constantly checking.
We crack the heavy door to seem constantly available and responsive to our coworkers. And what happens mechanically? All of your cognitive heat, your deep focus, your processing power, it just slowly leaks out into the hallway.
We do it because we are terrified of the alternative. We feel this immense pressure to never admit, hey, I am in a trough right now, I have low energy, and I'm unavailable.
Yeah, you can't say that in modern office.
You really can't.
Yeah.
So we force ourselves into this state of continuous partial attention, just a constant low-level burn.
The dialogue has this terrible but undeniably catchy productivity slogan for this state. When you try to be omni-available, you turn into a glow, not a go.
A glow, not a go. That's rough.
It's so true, though. You are just a light bulb burning out. You aren't actually creating forward momentum. Think about your own workday right now as you're listening to this. How many heavy doors are you intentionally propping open just to seem approachable to your colleagues? And how much of your best cognitive heat is leaking out because of it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if interruptions, space junk, and context switching are structurally destructive to the actual physics of getting work done, we have to ask why we base the entire 9-to-5 corporate model around them.
Because if you take the science seriously, the 9-to-5 model makes absolutely no sense. If you truly understand the physics of internal weather and task mass, you realize that true high-density work might only happen for a maximum of 2 hours a day.
Just 2 hours.
Yeah, your prefrontal cortex simply doesn't have the metabolic capacity to operate at that depth for 8 hours.
So what are we doing for the other 6 hours?
The source calls them the chores of existence. You know, the low-density admin, the filing, the minor updates. The problem isn't that these chores exist. The problem is that we are expected to play-act deep work for all 8 hours, even when the cognitive tide is totally out.
And that play acting is the root of our exhaustion. The dialogue uses a brilliant visual for this. It says it's like surfing on a dry beach.
Surfing on a dry beach. Okay, that's hilarious.
Just imagine taking a surfboard, standing on the sand, and going through all the intense physical motions and balancing acts of surfing while there's literally no water.
You'd look insane.
You'd look absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
You're exerting massive amounts of energy, and you are getting incredibly tired for no reason, because there is no wave carrying you.
And while you are standing on that dry beach trying to look busy for your boss, you feel guilty. We feel immense guilt during our low energy troughs because we aren't being traditionally productive.
Constant guilt.
But the source argues that this guilt is actually the most expensive piece of debris we carry in our minds. It creates so much emotional drag that when the high energy wave finally does come back, we are too exhausted from feeling guilty to actually catch it.
This systemic pressure leads to a fascinating behavioral split in how people cope. The dialogue categorizes workers into two types: the efficient processor and the architect.
Okay, break those down for me.
The efficient processor copes by hiding in a tidy inbox. They're fulfilling a script, they respond to every message within 3 minutes, and they engage heavily in what's called productive procrastination.
Oh, I felt personally attacked by this concept.
We all do.
Productive procrastination is when you decide you need to completely clean and organize your physical desk before you can think about a project. Or you spend 3 hours building the perfect color-coded Notion template instead of actually doing the hard research you're dreading.
Yep, it feels like work.
It feels like preparation, but it is actually a highly sophisticated form of hiding from the fear of starting.
Precisely. The processor is doing everything they can to avoid the heavy lifting of pushing open the iron door. The architect, on the other hand, takes risks.
They act differently.
The architect steps away from the inbox, ignores the space junk, and faces the mirror of deep work. And deep work is terrifying because it shows you exactly where your current intellectual limits are.
You might fail.
Exactly. The architect risks spending 4 hours on a massive, complex problem and completely failing. But ultimately, the architect achieves long-term structural progress, while the processor just ends up burnt out from managing debris.
Okay, but I have to push back on this on behalf of everyone working in a standard corporate environment right now. Isn't the efficient processor the exact person who gets rewarded by modern HR metrics?
Oh, without a doubt.
It is so much easier to justify your salary and your existence to your manager by pointing to 50 answered emails and a perfectly organized spreadsheet than by admitting, hey, I stared at a wall for 4 hours today trying to solve a complex structural problem, and I failed. The corporate system is literally rigged to reward the processor.
It is. It really is. The traditional 9-to-5 schedule, with all its meetings and metric tracking, it functions as a psychological defense mechanism. It allows both the employee and the employer to avoid the terrifying, unquantifiable mass of a truly meaningful pursuit.
It's just easier.
It's much safer to slice everything up into manageable, meaningless little boxes and measure those instead.
So what does this all mean? We've exposed the trap of the processor. We've proven that the white boxes on the calendar are an illusion and that our brains function on internal weather and limited RAM, just like the AI. How do you practically apply this to your life? How do you restructure your day to become the architect when the world desperately wants you to be a processor?
Well, this raises an important question. Do you have the self-trust required to implement new boundaries? Because applying the architect's mindset means you have to stop managing your minutes and start trusting your ability to read your own internal weather.
And the source dialogue actually provides some incredibly practical strategies for doing this.
Right. Let's talk about those strategies. One of the biggest hurdles is just getting started on a high-mass task. The source talks about respecting the static friction of the heavy door.
Static friction.
When you first sit down to do deep work, the first 20 minutes are going to feel awful. It feels like pushing a massive boulder uphill.
It really does.
But that resistance isn't a sign that you lack the skill to do the work. It is simply the biological and cognitive friction of your brain loading all those complex variables back into your active RAM. It physically hurts to load the context window.
So you just have to write it out.
Exactly. If you know that friction is just a temporary mechanical process, you can push through those first 20 minutes without giving up.
Another crucial strategy is taking control of the space junk. We all have our specific brand of productive-looking distraction. Maybe yours is clearing out your inbox or organizing your computer files.
My desktop is way too clean sometimes.
Right. Instead of letting those small tasks dictate your day, use them strategically. Audit your space junk and then make a hard rule. Commit to 30 minutes of the actual high-mass work before you allow yourself the easy dopamine hit of that cleanup task.
Use it as a carrot.
Exactly. Treat the space junk as the reward, not the warm-up. And we also have to talk about what to do when the energy inevitably runs out. We have to learn to actually schedule the trough.
Stop fighting the 3 p.m. wall.
Stop trying to force a sunny, creative afternoon during a cognitive blizzard. When you feel your prefrontal cortex shutting down, designate that specific time for your low-density admin tasks. Do your expenses.
Yeah.
File your paperwork.
And most importantly, stop moralizing your low-energy moment.
Yeah.
It is not a moral failure to be tired at 3 p.m. It's just the biological tide going out.
And finally, we have to structurally close the heavy doors. You have to stop propping them open with continuous partial attention.
This might be the most important boundary of all.
It is, and I want to ground it in a really relatable reality. Let's say you just finished a highly stressful, confrontational Zoom call where you had to vigorously defend a budget.
Ouch.
And your digital calendar says that immediately at the top of the next hour, you have a block scheduled for creative writing.
Good luck with that.
Right. If you jump straight from that hostile Zoom call directly into a blank document, it is a biological guarantee for failure. All the space junk, the adrenaline, and the meeting residue are still hogging your context window.
You need a buffer.
You need to implement a buffer. You literally need to sit in your chair, breathe, and let the cognitive dust of the previous task settle to the floor before you put your hand on the handle of the next heavy door.
It's about letting your cognitive orbit clear out so you can actually load the new parameters. It sounds simple, but in a corporate world that demands continuous visible motion, having the courage to sit still and do nothing for 5 minutes is a radical act of self-preservation.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it all full circle. The clock on your wall and the calendar on your screen is a lie. Time is not a straight line of identical minutes. It is an internal weather system dictated by biology and cognitive load.
It's all about energy.
Your metabolic energy, your prefrontal cortex's actual fuel tank, is your truest, most valuable currency. And protecting that high mass time might require you to be a little bit difficult in the modern workplace.
You have to push back.
It might require you to occasionally say, I am currently unavailable, even when your calendar looks completely empty. But establishing that boundary is absolutely essential if you want to stop just glowing and actually start going.
It comes down to a choice. You have to choose whether you want the short-term, socially acceptable closure of a tidy inbox or the long-term, unquantifiable fulfillment of being an architect.
And I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over today. We talked about how modern corporate structures currently reward the efficient processor, the person who expertly manages the space junk. But think about the trajectory of artificial intelligence.
Well, this is a big shift.
What happens to the future of human work when AI inevitably automates all of that low-density space junk? When the AI can perfectly manage the inbox and the scheduling and the endless Slack replies?
That changes everything.
If the busy work completely disappears, we will all be forced out of hiding. We will all be forced to face the terrifying high-mass mirror of the architect. The question is, are we emotionally prepared for a world where we can no longer hide behind our busyness?
That is going to be the ultimate performance review with your own soul.
So the next time you open up your calendar and see those neat white little boxes, remember that they don't dictate your capacity. Stop watching the clock, start watching the horizon, and embrace the weather of your own mind.